have a new theme song. Welcome back, my friends, to another episode of the Inner Tapestry Series, where Red and I talk about all kinds of things that really have to do with us stepping into our power and living more heart and soul-centered lives that are balanced with our communities and just all of that stuff. So we are getting into a topic that I'm very fired up about and very passionate about, which is unpacking the patriarchy. So before I get too far into that, because I know I'm going to get on the soapbox quick, Red, would you be so kind as to introduce yourself?
My name is Red MoonEagle. I am a psychic catalyst. I'm a teacher. I'm a healer. I do a lot of things, and I am extraordinarily passionate about building communities and educating people and getting people unwound from the bullshit in life and moving forward in an authentic way. So I passing it on to you, Safrianna. Here you go. Let's go.
Yes. And just in case you don't know me, I'm Safrianna Luna, the Queer Spirit Guide. I am a retired trauma therapist who is breaking all of the systemic bounds to really start talking about what really needs to be talked about and not keep myself in boxes. So that's what I help people do, is break out of their boxes. So we're going to just leap right in. So literally, Red, right here, this is printed fresh last night. This is
Yes.
the alpha copy as it's going to be laid out in the print copy of the poetry book. And I have been in the gauntlet of working on what I call hashtag daddy issues. And so that's very relevant to our topic today, because I was
Yes, it
thinking
is.
about this. I was like taking my shower before our podcast. And of course, I'm thinking about the book and I'm thinking about our topic. And I thought about one of the poems in the book that's literally called She's Got Daddy Issues. And I'm like, that was really a thing that I heard a lot in my youth, in my, young adulthood, is like, oh, she's just got daddy issues. Not just aimed at me, but aimed at women in general. But no question about, well, what's going on with the dads?
Right?
And I'm like, that's
Right?
what I've been really unpacking, I feel like, is like, well, what about the dads, right? When we think about the patriarchy, often we think of it as this thing that holds men in power. And some people want to pretend it doesn't exist, but it very much does. Like, we can get into the history. But, the patriarchy is a system that is giving certain people a higher level of power. Those people, for the most case, being white heterosexual men, white for the most part too, but everyone's hurt by this, everybody. And so why are we not even talking more to the men about the impact that this has on them? Because if my dad, for example, had a man in his life who was like, son, you've been through some shit and you have some feelings about that, you get to feel those feelings and you get to unpack them. How different would his life have been? How different would my life have been?
Right.
So yeah.
Well, and it's even it's very interesting. You have had, from things that we've talked about, right? Like you've had this really intense childhood in relationship with your dad, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I have kind of a different background with my dad. I was a daddy's little girl. Like that was the thing that I heard for decades. Your daddy's little girl, daddy's little girl. And I had a little sister, and she was really not daddy's little girl. Like she even expressed it at one point, like you're Papa's favorite. And I used to think that can't be a true statement because I never really saw it that way. And I had it both good and bad. I had the opportunity to have my sons live with my dad as they were growing up. And good and bad, there's a whole story there. But I see my oldest son have had this amazing experience with his dad or his grandfather. And Papa is, I mean, we didn't call him daddy, it was Papa. So Papa was always in my life one of these men that I thought had it kind of figured out. He wasn't an asshole. I never heard him abuse or, I mean, bad talk my mom at all. Like I mean, even when she did some really shitty things, like things that other people would have said, okay, you know, here's a fat line, you should probably not cross that. He didn't do that. He like was so supportive, and he was so caring and kind, and very much a man who was a man's man,
Mhm.
right? Like he did all the things that men do, but he also embroidered, and he did woodworking, and he gardened, and he folded laundry, and he cleaned, and he cooked. Like in our household, my mother could ruin a boiled egg, and my dad was like the chef, right? Like
Right.
my dad taught my mom how to cook. And I had a very different perspective of a man's relationship with the world and with his girl children
Mhm.
that was so much healthier in some ways. There were some downsides, obviously, but healthier than what I would witness sometimes in other households. And they always say like girls marry their fathers and boys marry their mothers. I did not marry my father. My husband is not like my father, but they have a commonality of more of a healthy relationship with the feminine side of themselves.
Mhm.
And when we talk about breaking down the patriarchy, one of the things that my dad, I remember coming home at one point and saying, I'm going to be a feminist. And my dad goes, good for you. You know, like there was never any like, oh my God, you should not be a feminist, right? Like it was good for you. And what does that mean? Like he didn't just accept, oh, you're going to be a feminist. He was like, and what does that mean? And I was blessed to have conversations with my dad about what does that mean and what does feminism mean in true equity
Right.
versus the perception of equality,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And I remember for years, like, you're such a feminist, right? That was such an accusation growing up. And I would go, of course I am. My dad didn't have a problem with it, right? Like, and then learning how traumatizing that is to men when we, as feminists that talk about feminism and equity, we have to also honor where the men are and have that conversation with them so they can feel safe in that conversation.
Yeah. Your papa actually reminds me of my papa, who was my grandfather,
Yeah.
and on my maternal side, and he was this like I don't think he would have ever called himself a feminist. I don't know that that was in the vocabulary when he was a young
Yeah.
man, really, in that
Probably
way.
not.
Um, but the poem that I wrote about him is the story he always used to tell me. He had a double brain aneurysm, and then he had multiple sclerosis hit right after that. So he went
Mm.
from me as a child being able to really interact with me to like almost a vegetative state. Like he couldn't remember things. He didn't know my name. So he called
Mm.
me by my mom's name. But he told this story every time we would sit out on the porch about this, bull that was getting really feisty with the heifers on the hill that he could see. And he would look out over the hill and he'd tell this story. And he just would laugh and laugh because he's like, this bull's getting fresh with this heifer. And she finally has enough and turns around and kicks him down the hill and he goes tumbling. And he's like cracking up. And there was this message of like, good on her for kicking this guy's ass who is she's saying no and he's saying yes, and she
Mm-hmm.
gives him what's what. And so I had that like really early childhood message from him in like the weirdest of ways, and that's the only message I got of of equity, of feminism, of a woman's right to say no, a girl's right to
Mm-hmm.
say no. And the rest of it was like just toxic, toxic, toxic. But I love that you have this different perspective, like that you had that. Like, I'm so thrilled when I hear that people have healthy relationships with their fathers, because I'm like, that is, the world needs more of that, right?
Yeah.
There's this big movement that I see right now, and I have very mixed feelings about it because society is not quite ready to talk about the nuance, which is the dance between the divine masculine and the divine feminine. Because society's like man, woman, extremes. That's what these things represent, and it's not.
Mm-mm.
It's not. But we're all meant to have a marriage of those forces within us,
Mm-hmm.
and we want to balance it outside of us. And I never got those healthy
Yeah.
balancing points until way later. And so people are just Like, they don't know what they don't know. We talk about that a lot on this show.
Yeah.
And we didn't really know on a societal level until very recently the level of generational trauma that was really taking place and just how many families have been impacted by the domestic violence that comes with patriarchy, right?
Yep.
So if we roll back in history a little bit, really, no, it was like we're talking like 12,000ish years ago.
Long
Not
time ago.
no big deal. But as we saw this rise of agriculture and a shift out of the hunter-gatherer societies, we saw also the rise of Proto-Indo-Europeans and those who were basically crusaders and starting to come in and forcibly take land, and that energy of, we're gonna get into some triggery stuff here today, so just trigger warning, right? That energy of like raping and pillaging started to
Yep.
become a part of the collective as groups of people started to see the opportunity to sweep in and basically be greedy and take and take and take. And so this rise of power has happened slowly and gradually over history, but kicked off from a point where our cultures, our societies were much more like egalitarian, more equitable, more we honor this divine masculine energy and this divine feminine energy. And a lot of those indigenous cultures also didn't see it as gendered. It was there could be two spirits, right? There could be people who flowed, there could be third and fourth genders. Like, it wasn't this extreme. So I just want to throw that out there. But there was this like, you be you and you contribute to the tribe in the way that honors your gifts and your contributions. And then the violence began.
It's very interesting. If you look at history around the world, the Indo-European uh, journey in that taking over, there is there are pockets. Let me rephrase that. There are pockets in the Indo-European history where you do see that equitability emerge again, right? Like it's not a linear flow of we went from hunter gatherer, we went to city states, we went to warfare, and we crushed the feminine, the divine feminine, and that's it. And it's just been crushed. It's never been that way. It's always had a waxing and waning flow to it, and a resurgence in the spiral of the emergence of the divine feminine back out again. And if you look at indigenous culture in the Americas, they had it too. They had it too, where there were equitability and roles that were honored, both masculine and feminine. They also had parts of their history in certain areas where the feminine was crushed and then brought back. And I think there's something about how that waxing and waning and that balance within our lived experience of the healing process of the divine feminine and masculine within ourselves, and that variation, that gray area. We talk about that all the time, like this constant flow between light and dark that has been a part of our history. I don't think we've ever truly hit a place where that balance was being maintained. And I'm always curious, like, can we as a society, as a human species, get there? Can we get there? I think we can, but that's just me. Like, I don't think I'm the only one that thinks that. But we do have to go back and honor the history of the cycles of these traumas that have affected how we see it today. We see it today in our political extremism thing that's playing out with Christian nationalism, right? And that patriarchal, like, we're going to go back to the way it really was or whatever. And I'm like, well, that's cherry picking history there just a little bit. But then you have the radical other side where let's throw the baby out with the bathwater. Men should not be in control of anything, right? Like,
Right.
we're seeing it. We're seeing it in real life as a snapshot, right? But it's been repeated over and over and over and over in history. Like, this is not new, people. This is not new.
What are those contraptions called? It's a physics demonstration. I don't know the name of it, but you have like the series of metal balls on strings, and you take the one and you swing it out, and it hits all the others, and there's
Oh,
like an equal force, and they do this, right? It's
yeah.
an even more
Can't
complex
remember.
demonstration of like a pendulum swinging from side to side, right? And
But
that's
that energy that is carried through the balls, right?
mhm,
Like we're watching that happen in
we
real
are.
life.
And it's so true that we're in this like kind of, I hope, upward spiral. Right now, it looks like we're very much in the downward spiral because all of the shit that's been under the surface is now here to be seen. So it looks really
Mm-hmm.
bad. It's really ugly. We have the capacity at our fingertips to have all of this news all of the time. So we're very aware now. And so there's this waking up process. But yeah, we're seeing that swing from that patriarchal dominant society as the predominant for thousands of years, even though the
Right.
feminine has had these resurgence. And unfortunately, in that, there was a time where, and I think we may still be here, I'm not sure, but there it has been the swing to try and switch it over to that feminine, quote
Yes.
unquote, control. And again, that's not the purpose, friends, right? It's to get
No.
back to where every single human, every single being is honored for who they are and their unique contributions. Not
Right.
you were born with these bits, you're going to fulfill these roles. You were born with these bits, you're going to fulfill these roles. Like, ew.
You
Ew.
know, it's really funny. Like I was a I was a daddy's girl. You know, based on like societal expectation of what a daddy's girl is, right? Like I went and hung out with my dad in the shop. You know, he'd get up at ridiculous hours on a Saturday or Sunday morning, and we'd go drive around town and go to all the antique stores. He would go to the farmer's coffee shop and sit and chit chat farmy stuff, and I'd sit there with my little cup of whatever, and I would just be expected to sit and listen, and every once in a while I could say something, and then that would start off a whole education opportunity for me, right? Like there was a lot of stuff that I experienced because my dad included me in those things. Like Papa made the effort to include me. And he made the effort to give me experiences that I don't know any women my age that experience something like what I experienced.
Yeah.
Maybe glimpses of it, but not ongoing all of the time. Like I did things with my papa all the time. And when I was in my 20s and my family split and everything was kind of chaotic, like everybody I ever talked to, they were like, "You put your dad on a pedestal." And I went, "Yeah, kinda." And he's got fucking clay feet. Like he's with a woman that is awful. Like she abused me mentally, emotionally, physically. Like she's my biological mother and he loves her so much. He puts up with stuff that any other human would go, "Okay, I've had enough. Like this isn't good." So he clearly has some problems, right?
Right.
But he did his best. I remember going through an awful thing in high school, and I remember coming to him, and he said, it was probably one of those moments where you kind of realize your dad has clay feet. Like Papa had clay feet, and he's shoveling stuff into a bonfire. He's doing the yearly burn, and I was in tears. I was completely devastated because I had a boyfriend, and we were writing letters back and forth to each other like boyfriends and girlfriends do. Like I had a stack. I had a stack like that thick. We were writing letters all the time. And we were in an English class together, so of course we bonded over literature and we wrote all the time, right? Like what do teenagers do? I have like this. It's funny, but I snuck out of the house once, one time I snuck out of the house, and I wrote a letter about it to my boyfriend, right? And he wrote a letter back to me. We didn't get caught, except what I didn't know is my mother was reading all of my journals and all of my letters. She was going through my bedroom on a daily basis to find out what I was doing because clearly teenagers are bad and I am evil and somehow I am doing bad things. And she, of course, like punished me for sneaking out. Even though I hadn't gotten caught sneaking out, I still got punished for sneaking out. It was a very like weird thing, right? Like a week later, too. And I went to my dad and I had made a decision as a teenager. I had done something else which was against the rules. It wasn't bad. I wasn't sleeping with anybody. It was just I had made a decision. I had done the thing, and I went to my dad. I went to Papa, and I said, "Papa, I don't understand. Like, what's going on here, and why is mom acting this way or whatever?" And he said, "You know how your mother is. You should probably not leave any evidence." And I said, "But I want to keep the letters because, when you're a teenager, you think you're in love, right?" And I was like, "I really love this boy." And he goes, "Well, you might love him today, but you might not love him tomorrow. And your mother's going to use it as a weapon against you. Do you really want that?" And I was like, "No." And he goes, "Well, I got a fire going here. Happy to help you." And I went up to the house and I gathered up journals, letters. Like I got rid of, I was 15 at this, 16. I was 16 at this point. I got rid of 16 years worth of journals and letters and memorabilia and notes. Like none of those things exist anymore because he was trying to help me deal with getting rid of the evidence in a way that he could live with himself
Right.
with this toxic person, right? Like,
It's so interesting because I'm hearing so many elements where your father
yep,
and my father were very alike.
right,
And what's really interesting, what I was like, what's the sort of shift here? What made these men so different?
right.
And what it is that when confronted with another man's wrongdoing, my
Mm-hmm.
father sided with the other man, sided with the patriarchy over
Yes.
his family, his children, the women in his life, the girls in his life.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was just like an interesting aha because that is this like I just from that story I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I could do so much analysis of what trauma history was happening in that family," right? Like
Right.
it's very open to me as someone with the trauma
Yeah.
therapy experience I have. But it's like this everybody's been impacted by it. It's just sort of the two different paths, right? And I talk about this with people who've experienced narcissistic abuse, but it's really
Mm-hmm.
any form of victimization period. There are two main paths that we end up taking.
Mm-hmm.
Men in general, this is a huge generalization,
Huge
as a
generalization. Yeah.
as a system, we're going to call it the system of masculinity right now, toxic
Right.
masculinity, often goes more towards one side, whereas those who are more feminine leaning or socialized as girls tend to go down the other path. But people can go either way.
Right.
And you're going to see exactly what it is, which is when we've been victimized, whatever that looks like, we are either going to become the bully and try to victimize others, or we're going to become small and we're just going to try to manage the bad stuff with as much kindness and
Yeah.
demureness and mindfulness as we can. And that's,
Right.
your mother went down that bully path and your father went
Yep.
down more that like silent, continued to be the victim. And then you went through your own journey, I'm sure. We all went through our own journey of these like
Oh
two
yeah.
paths.
Oh
But
yeah.
that path stems back, I really think, to the rise of that dominant energy, that rise of patriarchal control, because it's still saying there has to be a winner, there has to be a conqueror, there has to
Mm-hmm.
be somebody that comes out on top.
Mm-hmm.
And if we go back to, I love studying world religions and
Mm-hmm.
the stories of Adam and Lilith. And it
Yep.
essentially boils down to, and this is what stories were spread and stories were told, is that Lilith wanted to be equal to Adam and,
Mm-hmm.
essentially be able to be on top every once in a while. And Adam wasn't
Mm-hmm.
having it. So Adam went to Bible God and was like, we should punish her, right? And Bible God was like, yeah, let's do that.
Yeah.
And then they brought in the more demure Eve. That story has been twisted a trillion times, right? And I see Adam as the body and Eve as the spirit, and we can have a whole other conversation there. But it's just that example of how much we will twist. And unfortunately, with this rise of patriarchy, also is coming through the rise of spreading control, through trade, through political structures, through
Mhm.
governmental structures, through all of these structures, right? Notice that structuredness there,
Mhm.
that ultimately we're trying to keep one group at a time in power. And a
Yep.
lot of those groups are also religious groups.
Oh yeah. Religion is I I will die on this hill, but Christianity has really screwed the entire world up. It has really just screwed everything up. And for all of the quote unquote good, I will put a pin in that and just leave that there. Religion is a mass consciousness accepted cult, and it is extraordinarily detrimental. When I talk about my papa, for years, he was agnostic. Like my mother is hardcore Episcopalian, like high church Episcopalian. And it wasn't until I left home that I don't know what shifted. I think what shifted is I left home, because when I left home, my dad eventually ended up getting baptized Episcopalian. Like my entire life living at home till I was in like 22, 21, 22 when I finally like broke off. Like that's it. I'm divorcing all of it. I'm moving to the other side of the country. I have to heal. I have to go through this. Like I have to really like do the thing.
Mm-hmm.
But my dad was agnostic my whole childhood. And I studied theosophy for fun as a teenager because every time I'd make a statement, he would go, "Well, have you thought about?" Right? Like, I think fundamentally for years, because he went to that passive place, right? That the accommodating place with the traumas, right? And he went through Vietnam War and he was in the military. So you can't say he didn't have trauma because I
Yeah,
know he did.
we all do.
Right? And one of the beautiful things is that he continued to encourage me to question and not settle. So I joined like 7, 8 different churches. Like I was joining them all because I had questions. He never answered my questions. He never once answered my questions, but he gave me more questions. And it led me on this journey to realize that the Christian church, especially, like the rise of Catholicism and the rise of um, Protestantism and all of these huge Christian colonial oppressive histories that the world as a whole has been touched by.
Mm-hmm.
No one can say they have not been touched by this. Has really continued this patriarchal trauma and this oppressive perspective that I remember growing up in the house where my mom was like, "Well, we have our rights, so just use them." But no one in my family taught me or encouraged me to be involved. I was always told, "Well,
Mm-hmm.
you're just too opinionated. You would never make a good politician. You can't lie." Like things like that. Like you're not willing to put up with other people's bullshit,
There's a whole
basically.
story in that too, isn't there?
Right?
Ooh.
But this is the thing. There's so many women that are results of those generations of, well, we should just take advantage of the rights that we have, not figure out how to maintain, and then continue to heal and create equity between all of us that are part of this
But
culture.
Red, it is what it is. That's
Oh,
the
I've heard that
story
one.
we tell, right?
Oh,
That's the story that we tell. This just is how it is. And
but
like
why?
there are
No.
so many things that it is just what it is. You break a glass. Okay, it is what it is.
Okay.
I broke the glass.
Right.
Entire systems of humanity? No. And what
Mm-mm.
gets me there is that, oh my gosh, like we could there's so many great people. And if you have not checked out Ty Goodwin, I highly recommend Ty. I was on her podcast recently. She has a TikTok. She is all about deconstructing the Bible. She's like, what? This
Mm-hmm.
contradiction, what the heck?
Yeah.
Like, how does this make sense? And it's really interesting to see, like, what just kind of had an aha for me as you were talking about, a little bit of scripture there was They never teach the Bible in order in churches. It's always
No,
this and this and this. So
they're cherry picking.
they're cherry picking, and I see it all the time. Like Ty does these deconstruction posts, and people will be like, "Well, the Bible didn't say that," and then Ty will come in with what here, right? You know, here
Right
it is,
here. Yeah.
and then people are stunned, and it's because for the most part, it's a cult like culture of just believing what you're told, and you don't question it, and you don't really have like some people are very much about reading the whole Bible, but you're also, if you start interpreting it, no, you can't do that either. So it's like all of this control, and it's all fear-based control.
Yeah.
And
All
that's,
of it's fear based. All of it.
yeah, there's very few major religion structures at this point that don't have some kind of fear tied in with them. And if you look at those religions, there is also a masculine dominance aspect to it.
Yeah.
One of the poems that came up that in my new rights was literally, it's one of the shortest poems in the book, but it's like Father and God and how society has mashed the two of those together,
Hmm.
right? Because
Yeah.
Father God, this he is the man of the household. He is the God of the household. Like there, that's very pervasive in many places and continues to be a reason that abuse is excused
Yeah.
and continues to be a means to put unnecessary power and control in the hands of men
Hmm.
who, do they even want that? Like, do
Right.
they actually, or are they then socialized into it so much that they don't feel like they have a choice? Like, I look at one of my in-laws, I'm not going to name names. I am poly, so in-laws. Um, and I look at how they approach masculinity, and it's just this energy of I have to do everything all the time for my family. That's codependency. Like I did that as a woman because I was the daddy's girl too in a whole toxic kind of way, and tried to
Right.
grow up to be exactly like him because he was nurturing that in me, and anything that was like my mom was bad. And so I watched his example, and what did he do? He killed himself working to try and provide for his family, and in the end he really didn't. He didn't end up
Right.
providing us with anything when he passed, except
No.
for a lot of headache. And
Right.
so it's like, why did he do that? Well, because that's what society taught him he needed to do. He was never allowed to process his traumas. He was never allowed to talk about his feelings. He just
Hmm.
needed to be the caretaker for everyone. And that's deeply unfair. Like, deeply unfair.
You know, I've talked about my husband a couple times, and earlier said, like, my husband's not like my papa. He's
Mhm.
not. Yet there's some commonality. And one of the commonalities, I think, is that Papa was the man's man, right? Like he he was a guy, and anywhere you went, he was like the man. I mean, he's also like a big guy, right? Like he's a big Swede. So like I used to joke, you put a hat on him and you give him a sword, and he'd look like he stepped out of a history book, right? And my husband is not that. He's a smaller guy. He physiologically doesn't look anything at all like my dad. Um, he's also quiet and gentle and kind, and fairness is and equity is a big thing with him. But he still carries also the patriarchal burden of, well, I have to work, I have to provide insurance, I have to do these things, I have to do all the things, and I'm not allowed to do the things that I want. So one of the things that, as part of our relationship, we've actually talked about it, like, feminism isn't me getting all the things I want. Feminism for me is recognizing that my partner has a love of swords, and you know he needs an extra sword, right? Like, not because he's done anything amazing or he's earned it, or like whatever this weird twisted manipulation guys do sometimes to rationalize when they're fulfilling the role model of the caretaker type toxic stuff. It's because he emotionally, physiologically, spiritually needs a sword, right? Like there's no like, and we've had discussions where he's like, well, I haven't done enough
Mhm.
to do the sword, or I really want to go to this event. And I'm like, well, go to the event. He's like, well, but what about you? And what about this? And what about the other? I went, go. You need this. You need your friends. You need your community. I got other stuff to do. It's okay. Like, there's this. I've married somebody that's like my dad and not like my dad. My dad would not do anything unless my mother was involved or I was involved. Like he would go do things with me, and I did things that my dad enjoyed because I knew he enjoyed them, not necessarily because I enjoyed them, but because I knew he wanted to do the thing and my mother wasn't interested. You know, like there is a play there, right?
Mhm. Yep. Oh, the family dynamics.
Well, patriarchal toxicity comes in several forms.
Yep.
And I've dated guys that are that other side. They're that other side of I'm going to carry the entire world on my shoulders and I'm not going to let you step out of the role I put you in.
Mhm.
And that hurts everyone
It does.
and it continues to hurt. And we can't I mean, I married somebody who grew up in a Catholic family. Like everybody's Catholic. And my family was high church Episcopalian. It might as well be Catholic, right? Like the the religion aspect of the continuation of the rationale for behaviors and role play
Mhm.
is continuing to toxify and pull us further away from that equity. And we're again back to what we're seeing in our world today, like Christian nationalism. That takes all of it all the way back there. And the Bible is a funny book. Just FYI, I've read it at least 4 times now, all the way through. But I've also read the Book of Mormon, Mary, Mary Eddy, Christian Scientist. I've read all of L. Ron Hubbard's Christian or Scientology. I've read the Quran. I've read all of the Apocrypha. I've read several different versions of the Dead Sea Scrolls. I have read the translated Sufic stuff. I've read so much on Buddhism. It's not funny. Confucianism was amazingly fun. I've read Nietzsche. I've read Ouspensky. I've read Willard. I've read like philosophy, theosophy studies is like I'm still reading stuff.
Right.
You know, like I'm still picking up books going, oh, I haven't read this version of this thing. You know, like how many different versions of the Bible now? There's like, oh, hundreds. I've read the
So
New
many.
Christian version where they translated everything into regular language and it makes even less sense than it did in the original version. I've read the Catholic Bible is actually very different than the Protestant Bible, the King James Version Bible. So that's interesting. Most people don't know that. Most people don't know that books were taken out. They don't understand that the language has been changed. Some of the stories have even changed from the Catholic Bible to the Protestant Bible.
Mhm.
The New Christian Version Bible also has had the stories changed in it. So that's fun. Some of the
Yeah.
Dead Sea Scrolls and the apocryphal stories that have been plugged in and taken out of different versions of the Bible. Fascinating, right? Like there's so much to it that it just perpetuates this role play that people are willing to leave themselves in.
Right.
And it's sad that people are allowing themselves to be pigeonholed. And as they heal, right, as people deliberately go out into the world and go, okay, I want to heal this generational trauma. I want to work on this. I want to address colonialism. I want to address radical racism. I want to address gender roles. I want to address these things. They have a tendency to come into that space with other people where it hits other people's perception of where that role play is.
Right.
And they feel even more isolated and more alone. And it's so hard to heal when your world doesn't want to let you heal.
Right. Yeah, and that's this continued pain point that I just feel like we don't talk about enough is that absolute every single being is impacted.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because everyone continues to perpetuate it in their own way.
Of course, we all
And
do.
yeah, and if we don't take ownership for it, if we don't talk about it, it continues. So it's so important to, oh, I'm about to have a visitor. She's just going to come visit. That's what's going to happen. Um, she went to the vet yesterday, so we're going to be
Oh,
very kind to her and send her some love. Oh, yes. But, we have to continue to have this conversation because it's ingrained in every single system at this point,
Yep.
from religion to schools to, and, we could dive down that path for a moment. Again, there's so much in here of the school system. We had to be careful about language, right?
Mm-hmm.
With the fact that we continue to point boys in certain directions and girls in other directions through
Oh
our
yeah.
languaging, and how that also then continues to perpetuate just this simple idea that people aren't allowed to do what they want to do. They have to fit these boxes.
Right.
We're getting the full tail trill.
Well, I actually just saw an article recently. I can't remember if it was the online local newspaper, but there was a whole article about the influx of women going into trades and how, what does this trend mean? I'm like, means that women are like, fuck you, I need to get it done, and I'm just going to learn it and do it and make more money. Like, clearly, there's a shortage of tradespeople, and the women are going, well, if I can earn, what was it? It was $68 an hour as an apprentice electrician, then I think I'm going to do that.
Instead
You
of
know,
going and
right?
making, I think I added it up once, and like the money I was making as a teacher was like 12-ish dollars an hour if I didn't count all the work I did at home. And I'm like, oh,
You're doing better than me between tutoring, outside of class tutoring, going to basketball games, which was basically required, and all of the things. The entire time I taught school, public school, for 5.5 years, the public school average hourly wage turned out to be $2.25 for 5 years.
yeah, it's
When
so
you took
bad.
all the time, right? Actual time.
And okay, so let's just go into an example there of how this relates to patriarchy and how this impacts everyone, right?
Yep.
Is teaching is widely considered a feminine profession, which is
Uh-huh.
BS, and
Right.
predominantly, women are in that career. It's super low paid. Yes, men tend to rise through the ranks of schools into higher paid positions more quickly, but they're still being impacted by the profession being a really low paid profession. So they're not going to want to go into it, especially if they have this idea that they need to be the provider. I was the provider on a teacher's salary, and it did not work well. It did
Well,
not work
and one
well.
of the things that I saw over and over and over again is guys going into teaching, but always ending up being coaches. And so they would be teachers and then coaches to make a little extra money to supplement the teaching salary that they couldn't live on and provide for their family. And I actually had a friend who went into teaching that said, I have 4 years to make an administrator role because I've got two kids and my wife's pregnant with the third one. And she's also a working teacher. He goes, I don't really want to be an administrator, but my wife and I talked about it. And the reality is that she won't be able to make an administrator pay until our youngest child is like 10 or 12 because it's easier for me to do that, except I don't want to be an administrator, but I feel like I have to go that
Have to.
direction. I
Yep.
mean, the irony is that he and his wife ended up divorced 4 years after he made administer because an administrative position because he was miserable. Like it impacted their entire family in this
Right.
awful way. Thank goodness they're still friends, but they did end up getting divorced because they were miserable together because he was doing something he wanted to teach math and history. That was what he wanted to do. That's why he became a teacher. He didn't want to coach and he ended up coaching
Mm-hmm.
because that's what guys do, right? Like, oh, it's just,
It's everywhere. It's
everywhere.
literally
It's
everywhere. And
everywhere.
and while we continue to sit back and just be like, it is what it is. That's just how it is. Like we continue to perpetuate it. And so, every single person, if every single person woke up tomorrow and said, you know what, I'm gonna do what I want to do. Like that's literally what I'm in the midst of right now, is like embodying that energy. Because I went into that, and a lot of women go through this. I just want to throw that out there, where
Oh,
when we
yeah.
don't have healthy masculine structure in our life, women will create it themselves. And that was, I created my own toxic masculine. I'm going to work all the time and I'm going to throw myself into my work and I'm going to have all this structure through my work and it's going to work out. It's going to be great. And it was burnout. And you know, that's the reality of what happens in our society is we get burnt out. And so now I'm in the energy of I am not doing it unless I want to do it. I want to live in a healthy situation. So I'm going to keep taking care of the things. Like I'm not going to not do chores or not, you know, whatever, like that kind of stuff. But I'm not going to work in a situation that is not aligned for me, because that is continuing for me to choose to buy in to the really ugly structure that exists. That's why I had to leave being a therapist. The medical system is on freaking fire, people, and not in a good way, right? It's really ugly. And it's this, we need to control people to make sure that they are healthy, able-minded, able-bodied peons to work in the factories. Like that is all it boils down to. And that is the, you know, the bigger picture is the intertwined nature of the patriarchy and capitalism.
Yes.
And consumerism, and how that machine just keeps going, and again is not healthy for anyone. It's literally destroying the planet. And if we don't get our shit together, we only have a generation left, maybe. So
right. You know, it's interesting you brought up like the healthcare system, because I'm getting my master's right now in social work, and I'm watching conversations happen in my classmates with my classmates on it, because it's an online class. So I've been watching this for a year, and I've been watching some of these people be introduced to concepts that you and I talk about all the time, right? And they're mind-blowing responses. And I've had this discussion with my husband a couple times, like, oh my God, you would not believe, and I just have to vent, right? And he goes, that's kind of scary that you're going to school with people that are having these perspectives, that you're the one introducing this radical other idea. And he goes, maybe it's just because I've been with you so long. To me, it's not radical anymore, you know? But to my classmates, some of my perceptions and ideas and questions are extraordinarily radical.
Yep.
And they don't know what to do with it. And so I get some of very like, oh my God, this is interesting. Like you can totally tell there's a tenant, because it's social work online, like you have to follow the social work precepts or whatever. And some of these people have never been challenged, never had that perspective challenged. And we do perpetuate it. You know, I think how my life has been lived as a result of having Papa be this, in his own damaged way, right? Still a really strong role model for me in relationships with men. Like ironically, I had a really good dad. You know, like Papa was a really good dad. He did the best he could in his own damaged way, right? And he did, I think, try his best to balance out my biological mother. But the reality is that what I took away from that was something that over time created a bigger rift with us, because I remember over and over and over being told, you have to follow your passions and your dreams and find the things that you're passionate about and live your life how you want to live it. And being reinforced to be strong, independent, thought-provoking, thought-thinking, constantly learning woman. How that played out was not always something that I understood, which was, you're such a feminist, or you're such a strong woman, or I get hit on by other women who were lesbian in bars because I came across as butch, because I was so strong that there was this impression that I must be a lesbian, right? Like, and that was very confusing to me in my 20s. Like, I did not have any idea what was going on. Or men telling me, if you would just soften a little bit, or why are you trying to be the pants in the relationship or something? And that was a really confusing statement, by the way, because I never did understand how was a pair of pants, just FYI.
Right.
You know, like, The juxtaposition of we have the right to take care of our bodies how we want to, but then when I made a choice that was different than what somebody expected me to, all of a sudden I was giving up my rights as a woman. Like just
Yeah.
just very weird juxtapositiony events that happened in my life, that what I've realized gradually over 5 decades of my life, right, is that I can have a healthy relationship with a man. And in our relationship, there are things that I'm stronger in, and I'm okay with that. And there are things that he's stronger in, and we balance each other out, and we will always have to work at it. Our relationship was never going to be stagnant because it's not supposed to be.
Right.
And there are things that he's better at than I am. And I'm like, here, have your cookie. Enjoy the thing that you're better at, because I'm epically bad at that thing. And I can be okay with that and constantly allow myself to be challenged in my perceptions of what things are, right? And when I was raising my kids, like I had two little boys, and there is definitely a way that you're supposed to raise boys. And I didn't do that. I didn't do that. Not only did I not do that, but I would argue with people about why I wasn't doing the thing that they thought I should be doing. And I raised two kids that they have their problems because we all have our problems, but for percentage out of their peer group, they're doing pretty damn good considering. So this is not a stagnant thing. Like we have to constantly encourage each other as women working with men, and encourage the men in our lives to stand in their power. What does that mean? That doesn't mean lording over anybody. That doesn't mean you have to be the leader of the thing, whatever that is.
Right. It's their unique contribution,
Yeah.
right? Like just go back to that language, your unique contribution.
Yeah.
It's, to use an example of that, like my partnership with a man, he does not want to run the show in any way, shape, or form.
No.
That's not, he likes to support, he likes to
Mm-hmm.
be the energy, the impetus behind things, helping the group. But you're never going to see him like eagerly jump on a podcast or a news show. Me, in a heartbeat, I'd be there.
Yeah.
Hello. I like
Yeah.
being on camera. I like talking.
Woo!
I like doing all that stuff. And that's, you would, if we were going by traditional rules, like it would be the man running the meetings and
Right.
doing the face stuff. And it's just, what is your unique contribution? And like, again, I go back to, I threw myself into that hyper masculine role, but that wasn't authentic to me either. That was me compensating for trauma, right? Like what's so interesting about your story is you represent this, like, I really got the nurtured, like healthy view of myself, but I didn't get the warning of what was going to come out in society. Like you were blindsided. Me,
completely.
yeah, I could imagine that being like, whoa, right? And that's the problem with like sheltering our kids and not having well-rounded conversations and letting them see other perspectives sometimes is even though this wasn't like you were being indoctrinated with a religion,
No.
you were just receiving too much of the positive without the knowledge that the world didn't see it that way. And then for me, it was just the continued message of, you're a girl, shut up, be quiet, be seen, not heard. You're here to take care of your elders. You're here to please men. That's what you're here to do. And breaking out of that meant providing for myself however I could, which was throwing myself right into the deep end of work, right? All of that was rooted in trauma. And so my journey has been like, what's actually authentic to me? I like to teach. I like to help heal emotionally and mentally and holistically, but I can't do it in a system that is still ultimately governed by that patriarchal definition of success. And, with that patriarchal definition of success also comes the expectations of gender, the expectations of what it means to be abled to do things, right? And what makes you a valuable contribution to society. Like all of that comes from that same system of oppression. And again, every single person is impacted by it. And unfortunately, with that pendulum swing, that physics ripple effect, is that women too have swung back in many ways that have not helped the situation either, because it's violence meeting violence. And so that's where it's like, it's really hard because we need to defend ourselves if we're under attack. But there
Right.
have been ways that we have not been under attack, that we've attacked back just to
Yeah.
try and have that upper hand because we felt so oppressed. And so it's like this nuanced, how do we balance
Mm,
this again?
yeah. I think there's a quality of, I've watched it so much with this pushback that some of it makes me really uncomfortable. I don't think all men are bad. I have had amazing relationships with men that I really respect. I've had awful relationships with men. They are stuck in that patriarchal, they're miserable, so they're just going to make everybody else miserable. Like hurt people hurt people. That's a counseling thing. We hear that all the time in any of the counseling social work environments.
Mm-hmm.
You don't hear it out anywhere else. Why? Because nobody wants to acknowledge that I'm hurt and I'm hurting someone else because I hurt. Because that means you have to face that you're hurt. Gee, lo and behold, you know? And women who have been hurt, and my mother is a very good example of somebody who was hurt as a child. It's intergenerational trauma. There's abuse, there's sexual molestation, there's alcoholism, there's drug
Yeah,
use.
remember
There's
me saying I could predict all that? I'm like, oh, just from that story earlier, I was like, we got this, 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 this. It's
yes,
a pattern.
it's a pattern. It's a complete pattern. And that played out in a way where she considered herself a feminist. But did she do anything about it? No. Her doing things about it were so toxic that just perpetuated the thing. When I was pregnant with my first son, she was like, well, you have to marry the guy you got pregnant from. My abuser? Excuse me? What? What? Like, what?
Yeah.
It just, even at the time, my entire brain and my entire life up until that point had I think of the gears with no oil in it. It went zzz, zzz, like that cartoon character that the whole face just goes out of alignment. And I'm like, that's what it felt like.
Yep.
You want me to be with my abuser because I'm pregnant. Whatever happened to all of the things for the 21 years of my life that you said you can make the choices about your body that you want? You're strong, you're resilient, you have this education, you can take care of yourself, you can take care of others. Like, all of a sudden we were going back to this extraordinarily toxic patriarchal role play, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when I didn't follow through with that, I wasn't compliant and I wasn't being a good girl and I was an embarrassment to the family. And that too was another like, what? What?
Where is this coming from? Yeah.
It complete juxtaposition to the tenets, right? The morals and ethics and tenets of being a resilient, strong woman and being a feminist in the modern world. And, like all the things that say one thing, do something else. And I am autistic. And I was nearly 50 before I figured out I was autistic. So I understand that, yes, it explains a lot of my past. But that's a really good example of, you tell somebody who's autistic one thing, and they're living it. They're doing exactly what, like, they're leaning into that. And then you tell them, no, now the sky is purple, and we have to pretend the sky is purple. Well, up until now, the sky has been blue, and my entire life has been the sky has been blue, but now it's purple?
And I'm looking outside, and it still looks blue. So what about that?
Right? So when we talk about deconstructing the patriarchy, there are so many people out in the world that have been told the one thing, but then expected to behave the other. And when you have that juxtaposition, it creates an internal crisis.
Yep.
And you have to make a decision. Every single person who encounters that, you have to make a decision. Where do people go with those decisions? Well, they go to the place of least resistance that doesn't hurt as bad. I did it too until I couldn't. Like, as soon as I couldn't rationalize it anymore, I went, no, I have to break it all and step out of it. I have to get away from it. And getting away from it is very much like what you're experiencing. I have to make decisions. What feels good, what honors what I know of who I am, and I'm going to fall down and I'm going to fail, which I did frequently. But I always like, okay, what did I learn from that, right? And who are these magnificent men that are teaching me different perspectives of how it can be different in different worlds?
Mm-hmm.
And I leaned into the experiences. Not all of them were great. I've had the fair share of like, maybe I shouldn't have done that.
We all do in the learning process.
We
Every
all
single
do,
one of us.
but I'm not ashamed of that.
Right.
I am not ashamed of my journey. Did I make mistakes? Why, yes, I did. Some big ones, even. Yay. But I'm not ashamed of it. And it, it, that journey's brought me to this world where we have these big things happening, and I'm in a school where, and I'm doing a podcast with somebody where we're talking about like this toxicity of this patriarchal system that, yes, I am a loud, raging feminist, 100%. But I'm not a raging feminist where I feel like we need to go out and tear every single man down around us.
Yeah,
What we need to do is there's like actually a couple people I've been following recently on Instagram and YouTube where they're men talking about how to have healthy relationships with women.
Mm-hmm.
They're amazing. And I watch them because they're doing it from a place of, yeah, do you know where you learned this from? Do you know where this toxicity is coming from? And that's not helping your relationship. And you're going to end up divorced if you do that. You know, like she's going to eventually
be fed up with
falling
this.
into that, right? And they're talking in real terms with each other, like men engaging with other men in a healthier way, calling out the bullshit, right?
Mm-hmm.
And from a place of love and not from a place of, all of you brothers are awful, you should not do this, and you're terrible, horrible beings. And, you know, like, and it's not coming from religion either. Like, this is the piece that excites me. Like, they're stepping out of that paradigm of, we have to be God's male children and the head of the household and the Lord of the manor.
You know, I think it makes sense. I had a male client once ask, like, how is it that you work so well with men? Because if you can articulate that, like, that'd be great. And I really think it's that I see men as humans who have been impacted by the same bullshit as every other human. And I don't put people in boxes. People put themselves in boxes.
Yeah.
And I respect labels when people give me labels because that's their boxes. But we often put ourselves in such rigid boxes because that's society's presentation. That's what's quote unquote normal. That is what's expected. And so we don't know that we can break free from that until we get a little taste, right? Like my literal little taste of that was having a therapist in my mid-20s go, you can practice self-compassion. And I literally went, huh?
Huh?
What?
What's that? What's
That's
that?
an option?
Where
I
do we
didn't
do
know
that?
what does that mean? Yeah, and that's that when we live in extreme trauma like I did, you literally don't know. You had like the reverse. You were like, not extreme trauma with the man, but then I go into the world and whoa, what's happening here? Like we all have some relationship to being confronted with all of these big things: patriarchy, racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, you name it, right? We all have some intersection with that.
Yes.
So
you know, the trauma was opposite to yours with the masculine, but my trauma with my biological mother has been, I mean, it's not that I never had girlfriends. Like I've always had girlfriends and boyfriends. Like I've had women that were friends and men that were friends. And I think that for the most part, I think I've had a fairly good balance of both. But there has always been this little bit of shadow, right, with certain women.
Mm-hmm.
And for a long time, I didn't really understand for sure why. I mean, I had counselors go, well, maybe it's because this woman reminds you of your mother, or these different things. Now that I understand more about body activations and stuff, yes, I definitely have a thing with natural number one women. And now I know what that is, but I also get it from natural number one men. It's very interesting. There's a similar like physiological response my body has because my biological mother's a one. But I also have something weird with six, which I still haven't figured out where that original trauma came from, but it's definitely there. And I can have more grace, I think is the word I'm looking for. Like I can have more grace for the men that trigger that and recognize that it's not because they're a man, which I've always known that, but I couldn't quite figure out like why does that trigger me and where is that coming from? And it doesn't make sense. And yet I react, right? I'm
Mm-hmm.
reacting rather than responding. And I lean into the let's respond rather than react, right? And there's a quality of that patriarch. I've worked with so many women in my life that are results of traumas like what my mother experienced.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been very difficult for me to hold space with them because I know where it's coming from. Even before I know their story, I know where it's coming from. And I find myself doing what my papa used to do with me so many times. It's asking questions, helping them see and reflect that they don't have to be trapped in that paradigm.
Mm-hmm.
And watching some of these women in my life over the years break out of that and embrace learning how to heal, because that is usually the first step for many of these women. The hardest is,
Yeah.
I mean, you experienced it, right? Like even
Yep.
recognizing that you have the opportunity to learn how to heal, right?
Yeah. And I was in therapy starting at 12.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I was abused by an older man. My abuser, who was the adult in my life, found out, told my mom because how dare his property get touched. And
Right.
then there was, oh, we're putting you in counseling to deal with that, right? And then, but there was no real, I couldn't really heal because I wasn't allowed to talk about what was really happening.
Right.
So it wasn't until I was in my mid-20s that I actually found a therapist that could work with me, not
Mm-hmm.
the system of, again, like keeping, there's a lot in the medical system. I need to do a whole podcast series just on that, that is really
Mm-hmm.
about keeping us in the
Keep
box.
you in your lane. Keep
And
you in
that was
your lane.
exactly like as a kid, all of my therapists were like, marry for money, not for love. Don't like that was
Yes.
literally an advice one of my
I
therapists gave me.
yes.
And I'm like, huh?
I had that too. I had that too. And
Where? What?
and the amazing part of when you realize that you have the opportunity to heal, right? I've gone through my own, right? Like trying to figure out like what am I actually healing from, because I can't untangle this education background expectation versus what I actually encountered, right? And leaning into the not only is it okay for me to not stay in my lane because there ain't no lane that can contain me and I have embraced that shit. Yay. And ironically, when you do that, you heal not just you heal the people around you that you encounter.
Yep.
And my husband is a perfect example of that. Now, at the time, early in our relationship, I really didn't understand what was happening. I admit that. But as we have grown older together, we can both look back, and I've done a lot of reflecting on how hurt and damaged he was when I met him.
Mhm.
Recently divorced, um, for the first time in his life, like working out and taking care of his body and doing things that he enjoyed doing, right? Like for the first time in his life, and he was in his early 30s, like for the first time in his life ever doing anything he liked to do. That's a big thing. And this whirlwind crazy woman comes into his life and not only encourages him to do the things that he wants to do, but then says, have you tried this? Let's do this. Like, and encouraging him to be him.
Mhm.
And I didn't consciously go into the relationship going, I'm going to heal my future partner. There was no design there. Is, if anything, when we first got together, I was like, you're a little fucked up. You should go work on your shit. We'll get together and go do stuff occasionally. Like,
That's me
really?
with
That's
my last several partners. I've been like, it's not my job to fix you. I acknowledge that now. You want to do some fun stuff and start growing? Cool.
yeah, yeah. And that's what I did. And granted, I did it badly. I did. He brought me roses to my work for my birthday once. And I didn't talk. He swears it was 3 months. I still think it was only 30 days. But I didn't talk to him. Like, I ghosted the shit out of him because I was like, why would you bring me roses to my workplace? I am a one woman in an all male place and you brought me a rose? Like, you fucking retard, right? Like, but I didn't communicate that at first. I just ghosted him and he didn't know what he'd done wrong. That was awful of me. That was absolutely toxic. And I was perpetuating that patriarchal from the opposite side on the feminist, right? Like I was punishing him for being gentle and kind and compassionate and showing that he cared.
Yeah.
I punished him. And that was wrong of me. That was not only wrong, but that was awfully traumatic to him. It still comes up occasionally. Like he'll do something and he'll go, I hope it's okay. And I'm like, oh my God, I love you. It's completely fine. And it'll get brought up. Like the whole story gets brought up again. I tell everybody we meet like that weird story and he goes through the like, yes, she did. And I let him have a voice. If it comes up in a conversation, I let him share and I encourage him to share how awful it felt and how it hurt. And I let him have that voice. I give him that platform so that he can share that with other men in the groups that we're in. And I do the whole, I'm going to fall on the sword of my own inadequacy of trauma because I did. I did a very bad thing. Now we can laugh about it, but it was very hurtful. It was very traumatic to him. And I did the wrong thing at the wrong time in his life.
Right. But I'm glad you can talk about it now, right? Because that's this like, when we're not talking about it, there's no repair, there's no healing, there's just, it
And
perpetuates the cycles. When we talk about it, we can unpack why that hurt and like what's really under the surface that we can collectively work on together.
yeah. I mean, he said it. He was like, well, all women like roses, chocolate, and teddy bears, right? I went, fuck no. You give me roses, chocolate, and teddy bears, and you're out the damn door. But I didn't say that at the beginning.
Right.
I didn't.
He was doing what he thought would be a nice gesture.
That's what he had been taught men do to court women, right? Like, this is how you express your interest. And I didn't behave like all the other women behaved. And I didn't communicate it either, and that's my fault, right? Like I did not, it wasn't until apparently 3 months later where I called him up and we went out dancing and he was like, this is really weird. Like, I don't know what's happening. And now you're talking to me. And I went, well, I was mad at you because you sent me roses. And he's like, why? I went, because that's insulting. You give me a dead flower. That's awful. And he went, dead flower? What are you talking about? I went, and I had to explain to him. I went, okay, I'm going to take it back to basics, right? Like, you're giving me a teddy bear. I am not a child. You're giving me chocolate, which you're fattening me up and assuming that you're going to sweeten me up for something. That's manipulative. And you're giving me a dead plant. Like, that's an antithesis to somebody who has earth sense, right? Like, in my head, I had it all figured out. And he had no idea this whole other thing. I hurt him.
Yeah. And that's so funny because this still goes back to each person's unique contributions and unique preferences. Because I love squishmallows. Get me a squishmallow anytime. I am a grown child, and this is literally a gift on my desk.
I love that. That's so cute.
It's a unicorn cat, so it's perfect.
Yes, I see that.
But anyway, like, and I have earth sense, but I like the occasional dead flower on my desk that I get to admire if it was grown with love for that purpose. That's a very specific thing. And chocolates, it really depends on the chocolate. You get me cruddy chocolate, like the ones you get on Valentine's Day, I'm going to be like, ew. So this like preferences. We need to talk, and we've just hit this point, and I think it's because, women have been taught to be quiet. Weird. Men have also been taught not to talk about their feelings. So when you
Right.
put that together in a predominantly heterosexual society, what's going to happen? And we're seeing that. And there was recently a Psychology Today article that was, you can probably Google it just by searching the phrase, the rise of lonely single men.
Oh
And
yeah.
the article is breaking down that men don't have the skills needed anymore to communicate. And we can blame a lot of things for that. A lot of things,
Yeah.
not just the patriarchy, but technology and COVID and all kinds of things have contributed to our lack of social skills. But
Yeah.
it is not just what it is. That is something we can actively work on. And it takes that
Yes.
choice to connect and to come together. So
Hmm.
we could be on this conversation for 18 years. So we're at an hour and 15 minutes. I think we're going to start to wrap it from here. But, if you've been tuning into this conversation today and there are some nuanced or specific perspectives that you want us to get into about this, we're happy to come back and have another
Oh yeah.
conversation, because we really hit today on the fact that the patriarchy is hurting everybody. It's really
Yep.
systemic. It's like it's in the religions, it's in the medical system, it's in the
Work,
educational system, the work
pay,
culture. Oh, yeah,
everything.
it's everywhere. And it takes communicating and coming back together and considering our own unique preferences and contributions from that heart and soul centered way to begin to work on this. And I also want to offer, because this goes for men and women and non binary people and literally everybody, we can begin to unpack patriarchal control simply by choosing to stop commenting on people's bodies. And I'm
Yes.
saying people's bodies
All
because
bodies.
all bodies have been shamed, right? There's,
Hmm.
your chest isn't this size, or your waist isn't this size, your penis isn't this size, your whatever, your proportions are not correct. And that kind of shame also depletes intimacy and keeps us on a surface level of not connecting. So what are we doing there? Like, that is one simple step we can start to take, is to stop commenting on other people's bodies or feeling like we have any control over another person's body. And that is immediately starting to unhook from patriarchy, because that original thing was really, I have power and control and I'm going to take over others' bodies. I'm going to have opinions. I'm going to take their physical space and land and rights. And
All the things.
so
Yeah.
let's keep unhooking.
It's very interesting. I had somebody comment on Tuesday. We went to a market, and I had somebody comment, "Oh, I love how you're embracing your femininity with your choice of dress, and you could step out of a medieval picture." Which, by the way, that's a whole other thing, like misunderstanding history and fashion. But that's like my hot topic, so I
Right.
know that I'm more educated than other people. But the person who said it, I went, "Well, I am not going to accept that compliment because I'm not embracing my femininity. I just am wearing clothes." And the person had a pickled face and turned around and walked off. But I'm not going to apologize for that. I will not apologize for that because, yes, I have a very distinct style. You've met me in person, Safrianna. I have a look, right?
I love your clothes.
It's a choice. It's creative. I have made decisions that I like them. And it's for me. It's not for other people, which also means I stand out. I look different from other people. I have a very distinct image. When you're going to make statements like, "Oh, you're embracing your femininity," or "Oh, this," or "Oh, that," I'm going to reject that because it contributes to the patriarchal role play that all these people have bought into. I understand where it comes from. I understand why that woman made that statement. But I am going to reject that because it does not help us heal. Now, if you asked me, "Hey, I am very interested in how you made that and why you made that choice," I will have that discussion. But I'm not going to have the discussion about me embracing my femininity because I really haven't. If you talk to my husband, he's like, the more you've gone into your own personal look, the stronger you've gotten and the more ball busting you've gotten. That's his perspective. He makes the analogy of the brass balls thing, but that's a whole different discussion. And that's okay, right? Like, I want to have the difficult discussion with authenticity, I don't want to have the discussion that contributes to the continued plural or polarization of the rifts that have been put upon us from trauma.
Yep. It all
I'm
goes
not
back to
willing to
trauma.
perpetuate that. Yeah, it always goes back to
It
trauma.
always goes back to trauma. That's the hill I will die on. It's like, does it
You
not
and me
feel
both.
good? It probably goes back to trauma. And here's why, right? Aside from, ow, I
Yep.
stubbed my toe or I broke my arm falling, like the immediate
Mm-hmm.
things, most of our responses that we have, our
Yeah.
reactions are coming from
Reactions.
this
Yeah.
very long term. And sometimes our responses too, right, is still hooked into this out of date stuff. So we get to work on this. That's the good news, friends.
Yes.
We get to work on this. I mean, both you and I are a testament to how differently the stories can play out, but how we're all still trying to move towards that like self alignment and
Mm-hmm.
harmony within the collective and the community. Not homogeny, not sameness,
No.
but harmony where we can all uniquely contribute and
We
have our
have to have
preferences.
difference. We have to have difference.
That's what it means
The
to be in
world,
3D.
yeah, we have to have difference. We can't keep doing this the same way and expecting different results. And we cannot continue to allow when something like that woman, that statement, she thought she was probably being complimentary. She thought, oh, I want to say something. So this is what I think the best compliment I can come up with is. And I rejected it. And she was probably a little hurt by that. I will acknowledge that. And at the same time, I'm not going to apologize for it because I cannot allow the perpetuation of that perception continue.
Right.
I would love to have a discussion with her, whomever she is out in the world, in a better place.
Right.
But every single one of us has to lean into what we're comfortable with, to say what needs to be said or do what needs to be done to help heal that collective. I'm a little bit of a mic drop sometimes. Like, I'm not going to apologize for that. I've said for years, I mean, it's both positive and negative, right? I've had people tell me for years, like, you're so authentic, Red. And I'm like, yeah, well, there's two sides to that going.
Sometimes people don't like that, but
And
oh well.
you've done it with me before. You're like, hey, Red, can we change that term? I'm like, absolutely. Let's do that. Help me do that, right? Help me be better at that. That's because we can authentically be in that place in community and say, I get where Red was going, but maybe I can help her say it differently. I'm like, okay, then I'm going to practice that without giving up the things that make me who I am, right?
Correct.
Like, and that requires everyone in that collective being in that place, moving towards that harmonious acceptance of all the differences that make us these beautiful entities here together.
Yeah.
And heal the collective whole. We can do this. We can do this.
We can do this. Red and I are here cheering you on. We
Yes.
love your uniqueness and your unique contributions and preferences. And we're here to support
Everybody.
you in that, right? It's
Oh,
literally
yeah.
the only rule is don't go out and hurt people.
No.
Yeah, and if
No.
you
And
think
you
that other
will.
people are hurting people by being themselves, check yourself because you're probably hurting people.
Right. And, you know, I've hurt people. You've hurt people. We've all hurt people.
Right.
And how do we do it better? I've made mistakes. Maybe what I said on Tuesday was a mistake. I don't know. I'm not that other person.
Yeah.
But I also know that we can do better. And that's why we have community. There are times when I'm with somebody and I go, hey, you want to go talk to that person? Because I know that I'm probably going to say it wrong. And I'll go, hey, go talk to them for me. Because say it in your way, because I know you're going to do it better. You're going to do it way better than I ever could. Because I come across as a blunt instrument sometimes. Yay.
And that's your unique contribution. That is
right?
Okay. As long as we can communicate and give each other, like, this is who I am, this is who you are, how do we play together, right? That's what it's all about. How do we play together? And yeah, the rigid patriarchal structures, not how we play together. It's how we keep fear going. It's how we keep shame going. It's how we keep negativity beyond. It's one of my key phrases that I've really honed in on saying is that there's enough pain in the world caused by natural disaster and health without us having to hurt each other. We would still have enough contrast. We would, because we hurt each other by accident all the time. But like, there's enough contrast that exists without war, without
Mhm.
deliberately hurting people and sabotaging people, without sabotaging
Mhm.
ourselves. Like, there's enough pain. So we don't have to add to it. Just a
We
thought.
don't have to. Yeah, like there's so many other things. Why would we do it on purpose?
Why indeed. So we'll be back in about 2 weeks. Again, if there's a question you want us to dive into, let us know. Otherwise, we're so honored that you join us for these conversations as we unravel the bullshit and our inner blueprints and tapestries and all that good stuff. So it has been a pleasure as always, Red.
Thank you
Until
so
next
much,
time.
Safrianna. Till next time.